Joining us now is polls analyst Éric Grenier, the man behind the Writ. Éric, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
Listen, I think it's worthwhile to begin here with an overview, because we know that the Liberals, as soon as the new year began, they were dropping support in the polls. But over the summer, there seems to have been this precipitous drop. What happened? When you look at the data, what has led the Liberals to this point?
Yeah, we did see that over the course of the year, things have been just getting worse and worse for the Liberals. Once we did go into the summer season, though, it wasn't as disastrous as it looks right now for the party. They were trailing in the polls by maybe 4 or 5 points. It was still a competitive race in Ontario. Lately, the numbers that we've seen, more polls are now showing double-digit leads for the Conservatives. There was one by Abacus that was published last week at a 15-point lead for the Conservatives. We're seeing really very low support for the Liberals in Ontario, British Columbia, Atlantic Canada. Even Quebec is starting to look like less of a strong hold for the Liberals. So they are in a lot of trouble. What is pushing it, what is causing it is, I think it is just a question of how long the Liberals have been in office, which is now we're approaching the 8-year anniversary of the 2015 election. And cost of living concerns, inflation, it is starting to add up. Still, all the baggage from the last little while is now starting to weigh down, I think, those Liberal numbers.
Okay, so issues, fatigue with Trudeau, but how much of this is a desire for Pierre Poilievre and the alternative that he presents?
I think that we've seen over the summer that it is becoming a bit more about Pierre Poilievre. I think before this, it was more of a, you need to have an alternative. The Conservatives were there. But we have seen that with the ads that he placed over the summer, the convention, which went pretty well for the party, that his own personal numbers have been improving. Before, it looked like the Conservative Party might have been more popular than Pierre Poilievre. I don't think you could say that right now. So there is certainly part of it is what the Conservatives have been bringing to the table and presenting themselves as a palatable alternative to the Liberals, which I think before this summer, more Canadians had questions about whether a Pierre Poilievre government was really the kind of change that they wanted.
Yeah, and to that, you know, in the Writ today, you were writing about a new Poilievre poll, and it was talking about the name recognition, if you will, of Pierre Poilievre. Talk to us about that, the number that we are seeing out of Poilievre. And what does that say about the current situation? Yeah,
this was a poll that was done just before the convention by Poilievre, so it wouldn't have captured any of that extra attention that he got, but 57% of respondents were able to, unprompted, put in the name or a name that was similar to Pierre Poilievre when they were asked who is the leader of the Conservative Party. We often see with other polls, you'll just ask, do you have an opinion about Pierre Poilievre? But this one was specifically asking, can you name the leader of the Conservative Party? 57% could, which isn't a very high number, but it's also a bit higher than maybe a lot of people might have thought. So he has been able to get some good name recognition now that he's been in the job for a year. And I think after the last couple of weeks, that name recognition is probably a lot higher.
Okay, a lot higher. So how does that bode for Pierre Poilievre as he begins another session here?
Well, he is right now, I think, getting more of a spotlight than he would have ever had before, because over the last few weeks, the narrative is now, this is the government in waiting, this is the government, we're just more or less waiting for an election that will put Pierre Poilievre in the Prime Minister's office. So I think a lot more attention will be on what that could look like. Before it was Pierre Poilievre, the opposition leader, now it's Pierre Poilievre, potential Prime Minister. And I think that is going to change Canadians' perceptions and how they're going to really assess him over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, and whether or not they can actually maintain that lead that we've seen over the summer. But you know, it was interesting looking at the Poilievre poll, because another part of the poll that you noted as well had to do with the question being asked about cabinet ministers, whether or not Canadians could name upwards of 3 cabinet ministers right now in the Trudeau government. Talk to us about what we saw, because really this goes for anyone that questions whether or not Justin Trudeau is still the man to lead the Liberals. This particular question is quite interesting to that point.
Yeah, so 57% could name Pierre Poilievre as a Conservative Party leader. Only 40% could name a cabinet minister, any cabinet minister. So the poll, again, didn't give people any help. It just said put in the name of a cabinet minister, as many as you can. 40% could name one minister. 26% could name more than one. There was only 14% of Canadians who were able to name at least 3 cabinet ministers. There was only one name that came up very often, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. 30% of Canadians could name her. After that, Mélanie Joly was second with 15%, and then we're getting into single digits. So it does show that there is not a lot of name recognition for that cabinet. You know, if you think about it in the past, John Turner, Paul Martin, these would have been household names when they became Prime Minister. Right now, there's not that kind of figure within the Liberal government, which might make it a little bit easier for Justin Trudeau to hang on, because there isn't a clear alternative waiting in the wings.
Yeah, and that's interesting because the Liberals just had their caucus last week. We know that a number of MPs behind closed doors were expressing their frustration, but there was no overt measure to push him out of the leadership role. But given how poorly this government is doing right now in the polls, what does Justin Trudeau and his government have to accomplish in the next few weeks to turn those numbers around, if at all possible?
I think we're starting to see that over the last week or so. There has been new movement on housing. We saw some announcements from Karina Gold today and Sean Fraser about new directions they're going to take over the next few months. So I do think that the Liberals see that they need to show that they're doing something, that over the last few months there's been not a lot of focus with the government. They haven't seemed to be speaking to the issues that Canadians care about most, and that is, I think, being reflected in the polls and the fact that it's going down. For Justin Trudeau personally, these kinds of numbers, even if it is an election 2 years from now, a lot of Liberal MPs, upwards of half of them, would have to be concerned about their job prospects in a future election. And that focuses the mind for a lot of politicians. So if those numbers don't improve, it's going to become harder and harder for Justin Trudeau to hold on. A bad summer of polling might have just focused the minds for the party and the government going forward, but the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be.
Well, especially since Trudeau wants to have essentially a fourth mandate, which historically is a near impossibility in this country. Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre, though, and the Conservatives, because as we said, right now in the lead, an election could be 2 years away already. The question is being asked whether or not perhaps they're peaking too early. What does he need to do? What does his party have to do to ensure they maintain what they have right now?
I think it is the fact that they are now that government in waiting, or at least going to be perceived that way, that they have to come off as a reasonable alternative. Because once, as you mentioned, you're going for a fourth term, you don't get a fourth term because Canadians love you. You get a fourth term because they really don't like the other option. So if the Conservatives can minimize the opportunity for the Liberals to paint them as extreme, as a change that is too much of a risk, then they will succeed. But to be able to hold on a lead of 10, 15 points for 2 years, that is not going to be easy to do. And I suspect that we'll eventually get another time between now and the next election where things are going to be a bit tighter. But for the Conservatives, this is really now, the first last year was Pierre Poilievre being introduced, but now it's about Canadians are really going to take a deep, close look at him, because if he's the next Prime Minister, he has to show them that that is something that they can live with.
Éric Grenier, always good to speak with you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.